Now, of course, as we're talking about all this, we're really looking at the cloud and what's going on in the cloud and how we move to the cloud, and there's always concerns about the cloud. So I'd like to raise a few of those in sort of a keynote fashion here and talk about what people are saying about the cloud and what I see as some of the trends and realities of those concerns. People are concerned about lack of flexibility of the cloud. We can't customize the cloud the way we used to. There's obviously concerns about security and data sovereignty, what country the data lives in. And somewhat data loss, what happens if our cloud provider disappears. Now, we're probably less worried about that with Microsoft than we are about some other players, but there have been some very high-profile cloud services that just shuttered their operations and customers couldn't get their data back. So these are among the concerns that we have as we look at the cloud. Now, in many of those, some of those concerns are absolutely valid. So I'm not saying that there's not reason to be concerned about the cloud, but many of them need to be subject to a more nuanced examination of the reasons behind those concerns. And so some of the things that I see is that organizations aren't really willing to ask difficult questions and choices. And so they make choices that are difficult. And so they have a very limited scope of vision as they're making a statement about their concerns about the cloud. Let me give you an example here. And this one will apply to data loss and security of data. In New Zealand, several years ago, or last year I was in New Zealand and I was teaching a class to a number of lawyers from Christchurch. And they explained to me that several years ago in Christchurch, law firms there had a no-cloud culture. It's like, we'll never put stuff in the cloud, it's too risky, data could get compromised, we're not going to do it. So they had really good backup and restore capabilities where they would have their on-premise environment, they back it up, and they put their backups into a warehouse that was 10 miles away, off-site. And then there was this little 8-magnitude earthquake that hit Christchurch. And it wiped out not only their on-premise environments, but their off-premise backups. That experience alone opened their perspective that, you know what, it's not just about our paranoia about data security, it's also about data availability. We now lost our clients' data, and now they're all in the cloud. So sometimes it's a matter of opening up to a broader range of perspectives. Sometimes it's also about things like cost entering the equation. One of my big customers was very much no cloud, no cloud, no cloud until late last year when Microsoft announced 50 gigabyte inboxes for Exchange online. And all of a sudden, within a week, they're like, how do we sign up? And the reason was, in their environment, they could only, on their on-premise Exchange environment for many tens of thousands of users, they gave each user 1 gigabyte for their inbox, which is way too small. And so users were filling up their inboxes and then archiving everything to PSTs. And there were PSTs scattered all over the place. And the legal organization understood the threat and the vulnerability for e-discovery from PSTs, which is if the organization gets sued, there is no way they can do e-discovery. They cannot find and collect and deliver everything that would be required from an e-discovery perspective. And so the result of that would be if someone sued them, they would simply have to pay. They'd have to settle. And that would be so expensive that now, moving into Office 365 with 50 gigabytes per user of an inbox, taking all those PSTs, putting them into Office Online, Exchange Online, using the e-discovery features of Exchange Online, they would now be prepared to respond to the first lawsuit. And the amount of money they would save with the first lawsuit would more than pay for the entire migration to Office 365 and that service. Broaden their perspectives. So sometimes we have to look outside of the one concern we're focused on to really ask some difficult questions. Another set of difficult questions is, of all the concerns we have about the cloud, how good are we really internally? And I'll give you some statistics about that in just a minute. There's also a question of reality versus perception and mythology versus hype. And I'll apply this to the security question. People see the cloud as being less secure. As you saw from Simon's presentation, the cloud in many ways is more secure than we could ever do on premise. This new Fort Knox is something that none of my customers, even the biggest ones, would even dream of building and implementing and being able to afford. This is really exciting, cool stuff. And where we're probably, where the industry is heading trajectory-wise is today, those keys that are encrypting every single shred of an individual document, those keys are stored, in some other data center at Microsoft, so they're super, super, super secure. But there's one more step we have to go, which is where the business brings its own key. Where you come with your key that helps encrypt all that data, so that if some government body subpoenas your favorite cloud service, they don't just have to ask the cloud service, they have to subpoena you as well. And that kind of thing is going to happen in the cloud, and that's stuff that you would not be able to do very effectively on premise. So there's a lot of sort of questions of what the reality is of security versus what we perceive it to be. Another example I'll give at this point, back to the idea of difficult questions and choices, is lack of flexibility. We can't develop things in the cloud the way we have in the past. Now there's some truth to that. The app model is not yet at feature parity with what you can do on premise. That is certainly something Microsoft's aware of. They're working to change, they're working to bring that up, and that will certainly happen. In the meantime, there are certain things you definitely can't do with the app model. That said, however, you have to ask a tough question, which is, what is the value that those existing customizations have provided to our organization, and what is the risk they've introduced? So there's a very large European customer who was looking at migrating to Office 365. They were concerned about the lack of flexibility, and to really ask the difficult question, they went to the business and said, what customizations have we built? What value are they actually providing to the business, and what risk are they introducing? And what they found was the actual value being delivered by those code-based customizations was much lower than expected. The risk was much higher than expected because the infrastructure was not being patched and updated because they didn't know what would break, and so there was higher risk. And so when they looked at going to the cloud, they basically said, no more customizations, too bad. If you can't build it with the new app model, you're just going to have to find another way to do that specific business outcome. Now, obviously, that kind of broad statement had to come from very high in the organization in order for it to work, but it did. And they basically asked the tough question of, is the lack of flexibility in the cloud really a problem, or is it just something we think based on how valuable we perceive our on-premise customizations to be and how blind we are to the risks they introduce? One other key point towards evaluating your cloud concerns more realistically is that things are changing so fast. And we'll come back and talk about this in several pivots, but the technology is changing. So again, with the security perspective, now you're starting to see the new security features that Microsoft is adding to Office 365. That will certainly reduce the concerns for many people. New data centers are being built, so Microsoft just started building a data center in Japan. They've built them in other countries in the world. Certainly they have a roadmap for the future. That will change some of the data sovereignty discussion. And so what you believe today may be true, but you have to stay on top of your concerns to watch the technology, because maybe 2 months from now or even 2 weeks from now, that concern simply doesn't exist anymore. And last but not least, one of the things that has driven a lot of people's cloud concerns is fear of job loss, I think. Especially for the last couple of years. People were scared of the cloud because they saw that it was going to take their job away. I think we've already, in this session, we've already talked about my perspective, which I think this is the most exciting time to be in IT. I actually think this is great job security for us, because the cloud is way more complex than anything we ever built on premise. So I don't think we have to worry about it now. But I do think this is underpinning some of the concerns. And I'll give you a very specific story that illustrates this. A very large oil company hired a consultant, and the CIO of the oil company asked the consultant to poison pill their Exchange environment. She said, what can we do to our Exchange environment to guarantee it can never be migrated to the cloud? That's a scary question. And the reason was, she loved her Exchange administrators. She had a great team and she didn't want them to lose their job. That was honestly the reason. Now, is that business value? Business sometimes doesn't matter, people matter, right? And you always have to, that is always underpinning things, is the psychology of individuals driving the business can drive the concerns that are expressed, whether those concerns are real or not. One of those points we were just talking about is reality versus perception. How secure is your on-premise environment? I've been in defense contractors that still have service accounts set to password never expires. I've been in places where people can walk into data centers that they really should have no business walking into. Organizations are not as secure and robust and reliable as they'd like to be. And over the last couple of days, Microsoft has started releasing a series of blog posts that are going to go across 4 industry verticals, where they interviewed thousands of people to find out where they were in various categories. And I know the print is small here, but some of the things that are interesting to see here is that in the financial services industry, 38% of the respondents don't have budgeted disaster recovery plans. Close to 40% in both healthcare and financial services don't have good information classification. And how can you have good security or records management without that? Even down to the lower levels there in financial services, 20% don't use roles to manage access. So security really isn't managed at all. And when you start looking at these numbers of how we're doing things on premises, it adds a little bit of nuance to the discussion of what Microsoft has done in the cloud. Because what they've built up there is incredibly robust. It has to meet regulations across multiple countries and industries, and Microsoft lives or dies based on customers being secure and having reliable service in the cloud. So what they're doing and what they're investing is actually significantly better than we might do on premise. So how do we move forward thoughtfully as an entire business? Moving thoughtfully towards the cloud is simple, but it's not easy. We need to first make sure that we don't create our own pain. So in your existing environments, prepare for the hybrid world. Start getting going on it now. Get your tenancy up and running in Office 365. Experiment with Azure if you haven't yet. And where possible, architect for the cloud. Do things on premise in a way that will allow you to migrate to the cloud when the time comes, when each workload warrants migration. Develop for the cloud. I mentioned the fact that there's still not exact parity between the on-premise full trust model and the app model, but it's coming. And your approach ideally should be, if we have to extend SharePoint, actually I'll say two things here. Well, if we have to extend SharePoint, we should see if we can do it in the app model. And only if we can't do we do it in full trust. Now, part of that equation is not just going to be what is possible with the app model versus what's possible with full trust, but also what our skill sets are. And one of the key points for those developers in the room and for those organizations that have development resources is you really have to upskill yourselves. It's no longer okay to be a SharePoint developer that's always several versions behind in .NET and really doesn't understand the newest technologies, because now the app model is putting all of the application development off-box and in a place where you can use any tool set and you can leverage all the tools that are available to you. And you need to upskill to the newest versions of .NET, to Angular, to HTML5, to all of those things in order to ensure that the customizations you build can go effectively to the cloud. Don't assume it will be easy, and I think all of us know it's not going to be easy. So plan, test, and repeat. Anything you're going to do in the cloud, make sure you've really checked that it's going to work, you've tested it, you've done it several times, and don't assume it's all in one. Again, you can't drink the Kool-Aid that Office 365 by itself is going to solve all your problems, or any cloud service is going to. You're often going to need third-party solutions, or you're going to need to extend the capabilities of SharePoint. And one of the best things you can do to that is know what's out there in the ecosystem. SharePoint has an amazingly rich ecosystem of vendors with solutions. Know what they offer. Not because you necessarily have to go and buy them, but by knowing what companies are doing as vendors, you know that that's probably something you can't do easily with SharePoint. If they're making money on it, it's probably because you can't do it for free. So know what's out there, know the gaps. It will help you understand what you don't know. One of the big challenges we all face is you don't know what you don't know. Knowing what the vendors are doing helps you figure that out.